Welcome to Big Little Stories. I'm Ivy Charmatz. My guest today is someone who has spent decades as a well-respected and beloved journalist. Tom Bergeron is a veteran reporter, trusted editor, and now the founder and editor of BINJE, New Jersey's newest news outlet. I am so happy to have you here, Tom. Thank you for making the time. I always love our conversations. I have to start by asking you, is it weird for you to be on the other side of an interview?
It absolutely is. I've done this a couple of times and it's always different, and you don't realize the difference until you're on the other side. Hopefully it makes me a better reporter and interviewer, but willing to give it a shot.
I was just going to ask you that. Does being interviewed, now that you've been interviewed many times, has that changed the way you interview people?
It does, because you can see how questions can be leading or not leading. You can see I tend to cut people off a lot because I'm a journalist, and I can see, oh, that's what it's like when you get cut off speaking. So it's interesting.
All right. Well, I'm making a note to make sure I don't cut you off at all when you're when you're talking. So I want to talk a little bit about your career. You were the I'm going to do high level here. You were the sports editor at the Star Ledger. You were the managing editor at the high school sports site for Yahoo News. You were the editor at NJ Biz. You were the editor at ROINJ. Now you have BINJE, we're going to talk to you in a minute. Did you always know that this is what you wanted to do?
So that's a loaded question, and I'm glad we have a little time. Journalism, I didn't come from a family of journalists, but I came from a father who believed the newspaper was the greatest value in the history of mankind. The idea that he could pay a quarter and get all this news every day. So I was raised in a household where we had 3 or 4 newspapers delivered. The TV news was always on. This is pre-cable. So I really got an understanding of what news could be and where it could go. And I always tell people there's an interesting turning point for me in journalism, and it comes with the Miracle on Ice in 1980, when I was just a small little boy watching the game with my dad. And I was trying to understand why we, quote unquote, hated the Soviets or the Russians, right? Why did we have this big rivalry? And what was the difference between the two countries? And my dad said, in that country, they tell you what you're supposed to think. We don't do that here. And the reason why we don't is because we have the media who's giving all these opinions and all of these ideas and all of this news. And it was a strike contest between the US and the USSR that I never heard. So in many ways, I say that was a moment that propelled me, that said, yes, I want to do that. Full disclosure, the idea that I would get to cover the Miracle on Ice or the Super Bowl or the World Series, I was a sports geek as a kid, was equally as enthralling.
You know, I started out in sports also. That was my first, I guess, real job in journalism was covering sports. And to you, though, what's the connection between being a really good sports reporter and really good journalism in the world of sports, and how that translates into like regular news?
See, it's funny. For those of us who have been in the newsroom, yourself included, sports is always viewed as the toy store and the people that aren't really serious and the people that are goofing around. But when you look back at it and when you truly analyze it, there's a couple of things that sports journalism does that other journalism doesn't. One, we are on the clock 24 hours a day at night. The deadlines are sharper and crisper. Two, when you think of the sports, it's not just about the final score in the game. There's a lot of business, whether it's a new deal on a stadium or a franchise location. There's a lot of, unfortunately, players getting arrested, and there's all the, so you have to learn how to work the courts. There's a lot of marketing on how they're doing the teams. So you get a full range of journalism. But more than that, the point I always try to make is, when you're covering a team, when that's your beat, you're with them day and night. And that's where you really learn to, A, build a relationship with sources and understand how that's going to get you the information and the stories. But two, it's a totally different situation as a journalist when I write a report or go on air about a story, and the next day I have to look at that person in the eye. That's totally different than if you're covering a fire or you're covering a court case where you might zoom in and zoom out. Yeah. These are people that you see every day. So it doesn't change your coverage, but it makes you understand that you need to be sharper and crisper, and you need to see these people. And it's funny, on the athletes, the joke always is, look, if the quarterback throws 3 interceptions or the baseball player strikes out 4 times, they know they had a bad game. It's okay. You can write that as long as you're fair and accurate. You know, their family might not be on it, but they're good with that. As long as you're there every day with them, you can see it. So I can trace that to the business world. If I just see a CEO once a year, there's no relationship there. If I find a way to see them once a month or once a week, it totally builds that. So I always think sports is a great proving ground for any journalist for all of those reasons.
I think it also teaches you how to really to write a really good human feature, because of the if you do it well, you get people to become emotionally invested in the person that you're writing about, and that type of writing, I think, translates well into all other sorts of journalistic storytelling.
That's a great point, because you learn in sports to pick up the detail. If I'm going to cover the Yankees and I'm going to cover 162 games a year, how am I telling that story different on day 10 as opposed to day 14 as opposed to day 114? So it's getting the detail distinctions down that really makes a difference in sports journalism, because you're there every single day.
So,
The joke is, if you find someone who can cover a baseball team, which for those of you who don't realize, if you cover the Yankees, oh, it's a dream job. I want to cover the New York Yankees. That means you're there at about 11 o'clock in the morning and you're going home about 1 o'clock at night. It's a 12 or 14-hour day for 6 months. If you can do that and keep your stories fresh and lively and timely, you can cover anything.
so do you miss sports? What made you? I think I know the answer to this, but what made you leave that world?
So, look, it's a couple of things. The big picture question is, no, I don't miss sports. I did it for about 15 years. It was a wonderful time when I was at the Ledger. It was a Ledger at its peak, and not just because the teams were good and the Yankees were winning the World Series and the Devils and the Nets and the Giants were all going to the finals and winning championships. We were able to do a lot of fun and creative things, and it was, the access was still good. As you know, in journalism, it all comes down to access. So that world has changed. The access is more limited. There are a lot more outlets, which is a good thing. We can get to that later. But there are so much more outlets in sports. From a personal standpoint, and this is why you chuckled, I have 5 kids, and it was great growing up when Dad worked at night because I was with the kids during the day. But as the kids got older, I was looking to transition to something that was a little bit more daytime hours, so you can be with your kids in the nighttime hours, whether it's going to a Little League game or an after-school event at school or helping them study. So from a family consideration, making the transition that I did to business journalism worked out well.
And and you mentioned this a little bit, but talk to me about the changes you've seen in just the way newsrooms are structured, the way newsrooms are operating, and I feel like we could talk for 5 hours about how journalism has changed over the years, and I think you and I have. But what are some of the changes you've seen just since you started to where things are right now?
Well, there's access and there's a 24/7 nature of it. So if I'm at the Star Ledger in the late 90s and we're covering a sports team, all we're worried about is one story that we're putting in the next morning's paper. And if you're a fan of the Yankees or the Knicks or the Jets or whoever, you have to wait until 8 o'clock the next morning to see what that story is. And there's only 5 or 6 people that are covering that team.
Right.
So now you have an exponentially more people covering the team. Media is actually expanding, not shrinking. People don't realize that. I'll make that argument. Stuff can come out 24 hours a day. It used to be in sports, you would get to go interview the players after the game. Well, now you can watch that on TV. So, that access is different. It's shared by more people. So it forces you to be sharper. And again, I'll go back to the better relationships, which get you the better sources, which get you the better news, which enables you to put your story not in better context, but in proper context, which really is the key to journalism.
So when people are complaining about the changing landscape, you're saying it's not all bad.
So look, you have an opportunity now. It's no different than cable TV or other outlets with movies, where you get to pick and choose what you want to see and want to read. And I tell the story. So I was a sports editor of the Ledger around the turn of the century, just to date myself. And at the time, the Ledger was one of the last places that had a boxing columnist. We had a columnist that covered boxing. And every Sunday we'd have 25 inches of copy on boxing. And like, wow, isn't that great? So I remember the boxing columnist coming to me around that time. He said, hey, there's this thing called MMA, mixed martial arts. It's really big. People are starting to follow it. I'm going to put like 5 inches at the end of my column just about MMA, because that's what people care about. I said, oh, that's great. So every Sunday we had 5 inches on MMA. And then within a few years, as the internet explodes, there's not 5, but 55 MMA sites that are putting up 10, 20, 30 stories and videos a day. And you realize that journalism had become something where niche journalism took over. So if you care about MMA, there's tons of sites where you can get that information, not just 5 inches at the Star Ledger. So that's where, if journalism entities have to find their lane and not be everything to everyone at the same time, and understand, I'm going to come to Binge for this. I'm going to go to Insider for that. I'm going to go to NJ Globe for that. I'm going to go to NJ.com for that. I'm going to go to somebody's podcast because I know they're good. The reader, the viewer, the content consumer has so many more avenues to go to, and people are reading and viewing more than they ever have. So there's an opportunity there, if you're tighter and sharper and produce good stuff, that you can find that specific audience.
But those specific audiences, though, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. Sometimes I feel like people go to news sites for confirmation, not information. And that has consequences.
100%. You're exactly right on both elements. It's something that we can't control. If people want to go find the information that they're looking for, they can. If they don't want to find a reputable source, but just any source, they can. It's unfortunate. It's something that we can't control in the media. All we can do is try to be consistently solid and accurate, and go from there. I'll give you an anecdote about when the internet started to take over, and this was probably the last great days. Unfortunately, it's going to be the death of Michael Jackson, right? Michael Jackson dies. We all remember that happened. It was stunningly shocking. TMZ was actually the outlet that reported it. Credit to them. They got the news. At the time, on that day, there was a huge spike at the Chicago Tribune, the LA Times, the Washington Post, the NJ.com, because people didn't necessarily believe TMZ. If they saw it on the New York Times website, it was confirmation.
Right.
Those days are gone.
For sure.
The classic media is not the standard bearer, but it was interesting to see that change over and how it went. So now you have a whole bunch of TMCs, no disrespect for them. They do a lot of great stuff, break a lot of good stories, but it's up to the reader or the viewer or the content consumer to understand this is legitimate information, or this is just what we want to read. So we're gonna affirm our beliefs.
Yeah, and a lot of those legacy outlets are now citing places like TMZ as the place where they're sourcing information from. We're going to take a very short break. We are going to come back. We're going to talk about Binge. We're going to talk about the work you're doing there now. So we'll be right back with more Big Little Stories. So, Tom, on your LinkedIn page, because I did some research, it says you understand the old school style of being everywhere. What does that mean?
So the biggest challenge of media is face time, of content, of being there. Anybody can sit in their basement and write about the governor, or write about a restaurant, or write about a baseball team. There's nothing as strong as being somewhere and seeing people face to face. One, the information you get is so much better and crisper and cleaner, but more, and this is a point that I think a lot of people miss, if you're a reporter and you're at an event, if you're not coming back from that story with 10 pieces of new information, whether it's on a story you're working on or a story you should be working on, that's where you're getting the tidbits. That's what separates. We talked about how there can be an exponential number of news sites. I'll use news in air quotes. Being everywhere and seeing people face to face helps you get better information, and really that's the whole game, is who has the best information.
Yeah. So speaking of news sites, talk to me about Binge. What is Binge? It's new and it's doing great, and I love it.
Thank you. Binge, business in New Jersey every day. It is a new business website, although our cute little clever tagline that the marketing department came up with, not that we have one, is it's not what we cover, but who we cover for. So our idea is we're going to present news to decision makers at companies as well as municipal and governmental leaders. And the catch to that is it doesn't matter if you're a 3-person company or a 30,000 person company. We just want people in the proverbial C-suite, the decision makers. So At our basic core is, look, we're a business journal. That means who's coming, who's going, who's hiring, who's firing, what new idea is transforming a particular sector or industry. But we take it a step further. Again, we're trying to put things in proper context. We're trying to get the information. So we'll talk about the personalities of the people doing that. And people always say, well, how did you go from sports to business? And I'll tell you what, the people in business have just as good a personality as the sports people, if not better. So we're doing all of those things to make sure that they're getting the information they need. Plus, we just like to have, fun reads about things that are going on in the world and in the time. We can make anything a business story. Just because you're in business doesn't mean you don't like to laugh, doesn't mean you don't like an interesting story. So we try to keep it light and airy on some stories.
And I'll say too, just refer back to what you just said about relationships. Your stories are so good because you have those relationships, and you can tell that the way you cover something is very different than the way another outlet would cover, because you aren't just cold calling and covering something for the first time. You're building on a relationship that you've established and been maintaining for a long time.
I appreciate you saying that. And that, what you just said, is the challenge of media, old versus new.
Yeah.
So I've been covering business media, business news in New Jersey for a dozen years now. So I know the people and I know the players. And when something happens, I can put it into context. The old joke was the reporter who tries to cover Newark, and they're talking to Mayor Baraka, and they're unaware that Cory Booker was the previous mayor, because they don't have that context. And if you don't have that context on that story, and similar to any other story, it makes it a challenge to tell the story correctly. There's an old line I use in journalism that you guys probably have used too. The goal in journalism is not necessarily to look smart, but it's to not look stupid.
Right.
So
very true.
If I go cover an event, and so look, we have to go into different areas. And if I go cover an event and I don't know the background and I know the context, and the reader or the viewer immediately looks at it and said, this guy doesn't have a clue what he's talking about, boom, that kills my whole credibility. Yeah. If I say something smart, that's a bonus. But number one is to not say something stupid.
What's it like putting a startup together, a news startup together in 2025?
It's a labor of love, we casually say. Look, it's one of the things that's nice. It could not have put BINJE together in 1995 or 2005 or even 2015. It is easier in the sense that, yes, you need some startup capital, but you don't need hundreds of millions of dollars like you would have needed 30 years ago. But you can create a website. You can have people create content to put on it. You can sell advertising. Like anything else, it's a scale. How many business employees you're going to have, how many journalists you're going to have, and then you just start from there. And like anything else, from day one, your credibility is the biggest issue. So great to break stories, great to be ahead on stories, great to look smart on stories. But if you come out of the box looking dumb on stories, why would people come back? And that's the essence that all media entities are facing.
All right, I'm going to give you some time to do some plugs here for BINJE. So talk to me about the platforms. There's the website. There you do a print edition. There's the daily newsletters. Go, Tom. Go. Tell me about BINJE.
There you go. So BINJE has, our deadline, quote unquote. Look, we're 24 hours a day if we want to be, but we have two main distribution points. Like so many other people, we have a newsletter. Comes out at 8 in the morning and approximately 2 in the afternoon. And there's going to be 7 to 9 to 11 stories. So we're producing about 20 stories a day. Wow. Those are our two biggest things. So people can sign up for the newsletter at binje.com. It is totally free. That's a good way to interact with us. And then there's a homepage where you can go to where you can see everything all the time, binje.com. Funny how that works. And then we actually do a print edition, which has been stunningly well received. I think that it's a blast from the past and people miss it. We're not doing a lot of them. We did an initial edition that just had a lot of cool stories and features, but now we do more specialty issues. We just did one that was entirely on cancer care. We're going to have one coming up on commercial real estate leaders. So those editions have a little bit more staying point, but they're going to be, beautifully designed, tabloid style, about once a month. The days of doing that weekly, let alone daily, I think are gone. People want their news a different way. I want to deliver it a different way, but there still is a room for a print publication if you find the right audience and the right niche and the right distribution schedule.
When you're looking at your print publication or even the website, do you ever think about the papers your dad was reading and how that might compare and what he might think about the what your work you're doing now?
Yeah, it's funny because everything's different. They look a lot better if you think of what the New York Times or the Washington Post looked like in 1972 and the old gray lady. The Times, silly, still looks that way today in many regards. That has changed. The way we're distributing news is changed, and not just in the print. And look, we're doing a podcast here. There's video coverage. There's tweets. There's LinkedIn posts. All of that stuff comes out. But at its essence, someone like my dad or someone who's a news hound, they just want the news and they want it to be solid. They want it to be accurate. You don't necessarily need to be first. And I tell that all the time, especially in business journalism. Do we like to be first? Do we like to break every story? Absolutely. But the more important thing is to be accurate, because the people that I'm writing for are busy executives. When they come to Binge, and we know that, we can tell from our metrics, we can put out an 8 a.m. or a 2 a.m. newsletter, and it might not be read till 10 o'clock at night. And that's okay. If they're getting good information and it's accurate, that's what they want. They don't want half-baked stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Your reputation as a journalist, I mentioned it off the top, but is really one of the reasons why I always like talking to you. And I know you joke with me that I always like to talk shop. I do. But I like to talk shop with you because I just feel that you just get it. And I think we come from the same frame of mind when it comes to reporting and journalism and news and just why it's important.
To me, there's no other way to be. And I don't understand why that is. If you start... One, like I said, we were proud of the fact this wasn't intentional. It wasn't the goal. But I was speaking with Linda Lindner, my managing editor, and I said, Linda, let me know when we get to 1,000 content items. And we did on our 50th publishing day. So that means we averaged 20 content items, in our first 50 days. And if you want to spend a whole lot of time trying to be biased or edgy or pushing this or that, I don't have time to do that. I got to put out 20 pieces of content a day. Why not make it straightforward? Why not make it honest? And the content you put up doesn't impact advertising. Oh, you're just doing that. Okay, so which side are you choosing, right? Someone gave the example of offshore wind. Are we pro offshore wind? Or are we anti offshore wind? Are we going to write all our stories one way or the other? Does that really impact anything? It's no different in sports. Do you like the Yankees or do you like the Red Sox? Just give people the usable information. The ones who have a spin and have an angle are going to be short-lived and not have the staying power and not have the reputation you have. Why would you do anything in life that challenges your integrity? I don't get it.
That's a perfect place to leave it. So binge.com, you mentioned binge.com is the website. Tom, we end all of these interviews with something we call 3 big little questions. We do rapid fire. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Tom, how do you get yourself out of a bad mood?
I go to work. I have coffee. Look, life's too short to be in a bad mood. So you have to be upbeat. You have to keep going. Things happen. They're all opportunities to be something better. So you just keep plowing forward, and coffee always helps.
And what is your go-to karaoke song?
So there's 2 things that I proudly can say.
Okay.
We haven't discussed the fact that I worked in the restaurant industry for about 10 years.
Oh.
I never once sang happy birthday at a table. When everyone told me it was someone's birthday, I said happy birthday and I brought on the cake. And I have never once performed in karaoke.
I don't think you answered the question, but okay. And this one's going to be hard for you to answer, but do you have a favorite spot in New Jersey? When people ask you, what is the best thing about New Jersey, the best place to go in New Jersey, the beach, the city, somewhere? What do you love about New Jersey?
This is going to sound silly, but I just love my hometown of Morris Plains.
Yeah.
Raised all my kids here. It's a small town. What's unique about New Jersey is that you have a whole bunch of small towns bundled together. So yes, we're right next to big towns and little towns, but if you're in your little 5,000 person enclave of Morris Plains, and we have Arthur's and a couple other great restaurants and a great park and a great Little League field, which was a haven for me for years, that's where I'm happiest.
Tom Bergeron from Binge. Thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Talk to you soon. And that will do it for this week's Big Little Stories. Be sure to check us out on Instagram at Big Little Story Show. I'm Ivy Charmatz. I'll see you next time.